Hi guys, tonight we're slipping into the stranger golden beginning of beer, long before neon signs, frosty mugs, and that one friend who insists he can taste notes of biscuit. Picture dawn spreading over a young farming village. Wet grain rests in a clay bowl. Smoke drifts from a cooking fire. Somewhere nearby, someone has forgotten a mash of barley and water, and tiny invisible life has begun its quiet work. What if civilization did not begin with kings, swords, or grand monuments, but with people gathering around a shared drink that was cloudy, sour, nourishing, and just a little magical? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and as you get comfortable, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is. Maybe it is midnight in Manila, dusk in Dublin, or a sleepy 2 a.m. in Toronto. Now, dim the lights and let yourself step barefoot into the soft dust of the ancient world. You are standing near the edge of a settlement that is not quite a village as you would know it, not quite a camp, but something in between. The air is cool at first, blue with early morning, and the ground holds the memory of night beneath your feet. You can feel grit between your toes. You can smell damp earth, crushed stalks, wood smoke, and the faint sweet scent of grain that has been soaked, cooked, or spilled. Around you, people move slowly into the day. A child coughs. A dog noses through ash. Someone lifts a woven basket. Someone else bends beside a grinding stone, pushing grain back and forth with a rhythm so steady it becomes almost musical. This is the world before written history has properly opened its eyes. No one here is writing recipes on tablets yet. No one is announcing a brewery launch with tasteful branding and a minimalist logo. Very tragic, obviously. Instead, knowledge lives in hands, mouths, habits, and memory. You learn by watching. You copy the angle of an older woman's wrist as she grinds seeds. You notice when soaked grains turn sweeter. You remember which clay jar made people laugh too loudly, sing too long, or sleep too deeply. Beer begins here not as a polished invention, but as an accident that becomes useful. Grain meets water, grain warms, grain sprouts, grain breaks down into sugars, wild yeasts, floating in the air and clinging to skins. Baskets and vessels drift into the mixture. Bubbles rise, a smell changes. What was plain mash becomes something alive. You lean near the vessel and hear it faintly, a soft pop and sigh. Like a tiny swamp having big opinions. It is not the clear, golden drink poured in modern glass. It is thick, cloudy, perhaps sour, perhaps smoky, perhaps full of floating bits of grain. It may be closer to a meal than a beverage, and still, when you taste it, you understand why people remember it. It touches your lips, warm or cool, depending on the season and the vessel. It is grainy on the tongue, a little tangy, faintly sweet, with a low bitterness from husks or smoke. It fills the stomach. It relaxes the shoulders. It makes conversation easier after a day of scraping, digging, carrying, grinding, and hoping the weather does not ruin everything, because the weather, as always, has never bothered to consult anyone. One mainstream historical fact sits quietly under this scene. Beer is among the oldest known alcoholic drinks connected to settled grain-growing communities. Archaeologists have found evidence of fermented grain beverages deep in prehistory. And one famous site in the Near East, Göbekli Tepe, has even inspired discussion about whether large stone basins there might have been used for brewing or feasting. You do not need to picture a tidy pub. Picture gatherings and storage pits and stone tools, wild grasses slowly becoming crops, and people discovering that grain could do more than become bread or porridge. It could become a shared mood. You walk past low shelters made of reeds, mud, timber, or stone, depending on the place and time your imagination chooses to settle. The roofs are rough, the doorways are small. Inside, The air is close and smoky. Clay vessels sit near the wall. Some hold water, some hold grain. Some hold things that smell faintly dangerous, which is often how history introduces its best ideas. A woman crouches by a pot, stirring mash with a stick polished by use. Her hands are strong. Her nails are dark with flour and soil. She does not separate cooking from brewing in the way later centuries might. Food and drink are part of the same patient work of survival. You follow the smell of heating grain. It is comforting, like bread before bread has fully made up its mind. The fire cracks softly. Ash shifts. A baby murmurs against someone's shoulder. Outside, birds call from the scrub. The atmosphere is intimate, practical, and fragile. Everything depends on cooperation. You grind together, harvest together, repair together, bury together, celebrate together. In that shared life, a vessel of fermented grain is more than liquid. It is a reason to gather. Historians still argue whether beer helped encourage people to settle down and grow cereal crops, or whether settled farming came first and beer followed as a pleasant, nutritious bonus. It is a wonderfully human argument, because both sides are basically asking whether people built civilization for bread, for beer, or for the irresistible thrill of not moving camp every few weeks. The cautious answer is that no single cause explains the shift to farming. Climate, population, local plants, animals, storage, ritual, and chance all matter. But it is not foolish to imagine beer as one of the rewards that made grain worth the trouble. And grain is trouble. You feel it in your back as you bend to harvest. You feel it in your palms as stalks scratch skin. You feel it in your jaw when small stones from grinding slip into food and wear down teeth. Farming is not a gentle upgrade from wandering life. It ties you to seasons, pests, drought, and storage. It asks you to defend fields and granaries. It makes labour more repetitive. Yet it also creates surplus, memory, inheritance, and gatherings large enough for stories to grow long. Somewhere in that exchange, beer waits in a clay jar, quietly saying, "Well, at least I am here." A quirky tidbit drifts through the smoke. Some researchers have suggested that people may have used reed straws to drink early beers, especially when the beverage was thick with grain solids floating on top. Imagine kneeling around a shared vessel, each person leaning in with a hollow reed, sipping beneath the floating husks. It is communal, slightly awkward, and not very glamorous, but there is tenderness in it too. Faces bend toward the same pot, eyes meet over the rim. Someone laughs, someone coughs because they inhaled a husk. History, sadly, does not record who first tried to look dignified while drinking porridge through a straw. You stay with them as the day unfolds. The sun rises higher and warms the walls. The settlement smells stronger now: sweat, smoke, animals, grain dust, fermenting mash, damp clay. Flies gather where something is spilled. People slap them away without much drama. Work continues. A stone blade flashes. Baskets creak. A grinding stone hums with that slow, sandy rasp. Back and forth, back and forth. A sound so old it seems to belong to the earth itself. Beer in this early world is not only celebration, it can be nutrition. Fermentation can make some nutrients easier to absorb. It can change flavour, preserve energy from grain, and possibly make water safer in certain contexts, though it would be too simple to say ancient people drank beer only because water was unsafe. That popular claim gets repeated a little too eagerly, usually by people trying to justify and leaven a pint as a public health measure. In reality, ancient communities knew water sources, and beer existed among many drinks and foods. Still, a low-alcohol fermented grain drink could be filling, useful, and socially important. You lift a clay cup. It is rough against your fingers, cool where the liquid touches the inside, warm where the sun has touched the rim. There may not be a word for beer here that survives to us. There may not even be a single recipe. Each batch depends on grain, water, vessel, weather, and the invisible life that wanders in. The drink changes with the season. It changes with the woman or man who makes it. It changes with luck. Later ages will measure heat, isolate yeast, polish copper, build brands, and argue about foam height. Here, brewing is a relationship with uncertainty. The first sip is strange, but the second makes more sense. You feel it settle in your belly. The taste is not refined, yet it carries effort planting, harvesting, soaking, drying, grinding, heating, waiting. A drink like this contains time. It contains the labour of many hands. It contains the quiet courage of staying in one place long enough to trust next season. As evening comes, the settlement softens. The sky turns copper, then violet. Smoke lies low and blue around the huts. The day's heat fades from the ground. You hear voices gather around a fire. Not loud yet, just murmuring. A pot is opened. The smell rises, sour and bready, with something lively underneath. Someone pours. Someone gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself onto a mat or the packed earth, feeling the day's dust cling to your skin. Around the fire, beer becomes story. A hunter describes tracks near the river. An older woman corrects him because apparently even in prehistory, someone is confidently wrong at the fire. A young person watches who receives the first cup. Learning status without needing a lecture. A couple leans close. A child is told not to touch the jar. The stars appear slowly overhead, one by one, like holes pricked in a dark hide. This is one of beer's great powers. It turns grain into memory. It gathers people at the end of the effort. It gives shape to feasts, agreements, rituals, jokes, and grief. Perhaps a batch is made for a burial, another for a seasonal gathering, another for the return of hunters, another simply because the grain is there and the vessel is ready. Not every cup is sacred, not every cup is ordinary. In early human life, those categories often blur. The practical and the magical sit side by side, sharing the same fire. You notice how the drink changes the room. If a fire circle can be called a room, shoulders loosen, voices deepen, someone hums, hands move in rhythm on a drum or a stretched skin, or perhaps simply clap against thighs. The sound is soft enough to let sleep approach. The smell of fermentation mingles with smoke and night air. Your eyelids grow heavier, but you keep watching the cup pass from hand to hand. There is no king here ordering monuments, no tax collector counting jars, no priestly hymn carved into clay. Those will come in other places with other systems, when beer becomes wages, offerings, and law. Here it is still closer to the beginning, a discovery made through hunger, patience, accident, and attention. It belongs to kitchens before palaces, to hands before texts, to taste before theory. You can imagine the first person brave enough to drink the bubbling mash. Maybe they were hungry, maybe curious, maybe dared by someone annoying, which would also be historically believable. They sniffed it, frowned, tasted it, waited for disaster, and instead found warmth moving through the body. After that, someone remembered. Then someone repeated it. Then someone improved it without calling it innovation. Human beings are very good at pretending survival experiments are normal once they work. Night deepens, the jar is lower now, the fire settles into red coals, the grinding stone is silent, the baskets rest. A breeze touches your cheek, carrying the dry scent of grasses beyond the settlement. You hear insects, distant animals, soft breathing, the occasional crack of ember. Above you, the stars do not care that civilization is beginning to stir, but you do. You can feel it in this small circle grain stored against hunger. Vessels shaped by hand, drink shared after labour, stories growing longer because people remain together. Beer does not build civilization alone. Nothing does. But it slips into the foundations with unusual ease. It belongs wherever grain is planted, wherever communities gather, wherever work needs reward, wherever ritual needs a taste, wherever strangers need a reason to sit down and become less strange. It is humble, cloudy, and alive. It begins in the soft borderland between food and drink, accident and skill, daily life and ceremony. You sit quietly as the last cup comes near. The clay feels cool now. The liquid is thicker at the bottom, a little gritty, a little sour, but not unpleasant. You drink slowly. The firelight trembles on the faces around you. No one here knows they are part of the history of beer. No one knows future cities will rise beside rivers, that scribes will record rations, that monks will tend kettles, that factories will hiss with steam, that people thousands of years away will open cans while watching sports under electric light. Here, there is only the night, the grain, the vessel, the breath of yeast, and the human wish to gather. And in that wish, the first foam of beer quietly appears. You enter the city by water because in southern Mesopotamia, water is the old road, the patient road, the road that carries reeds, baskets, fish, clay, grain, and gossip with equal seriousness. The river moves slowly beside mud brick walls, brown and shining beneath the morning light. It smells of silt, wet reeds, animals, and smoke from cooking fires. Boats nudge against the banks with soft wooden knocks. Men call to one another from the quay. Donkeys complain in the distance, proving that the ancient world has already invented traffic noise. You step onto packed earth, and the city rises around you in warm colours, sun-baked brick, pale dust, woven reed mats, dark doorways, and rooftops where people dry grain under a sky so wide it feels almost ceremonial. This is Sumer, one of the great cradles of urban life, where cities such as Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur become dense with temples, workshops, scribes, farmers, officials, and ordinary people trying to get through the day without losing their sandals in the mud. Beer is everywhere here, not hidden away as a naughty pleasure, not reserved only for feasts, but woven into the city's working body. It is counted, brewed, served, taxed, offered, and praised. The mainstream historical fact rests in clay Sumerians recorded beer in cuneiform writing, and some of the earliest written documents in the world include lists of grain, labour, and rations. Beer is not merely a drink in this place. It is part of administration, part of religion, part of wages, part of daily nourishment, and part of the very serious business of keeping a city alive without spreadsheets. The scribes, one suspects, would have loved spreadsheets. Clay tablets were just heavier. You walk toward a brewing space near a temple household. The air thickens with heat. You smell barley, dates, damp clay, and something sweet turning sharper in a large vessel. The floor is gritty beneath your feet. Your fingers brush a wall made of mud brick, rough, warm, and slightly crumbly at the edge. Inside, workers move with practiced care. Some handle grain, some stir mash, some carry jars sealed with clay stoppers. Steam lifts into the dim room and gathers under the roof, making the air soft and close. The brewing here is not a modern, clean line of stainless steel and polished taps. It is earthier, darker, more intimate. Barley may be malted, dried, crushed, mixed with water, and transformed through steps that are practical but also a little mysterious. There may be date syrup or other flavouring ingredients in some drinks. There may be different strengths and textures. Some beers are probably fresh and mild. Others may be thicker, sweeter, stronger, or more sour. the exact taste slips away from us, because clay tablets can preserve marks, but not foam on the tongue. You watch a brewer bend over a jar. Her hands are quick and sure. Sumerian brewing seems to have been strongly associated with women in household and tavern settings. While larger institutions also controlled production through temples and palace estates, a worker lifts a basket of grain and dust blooms in the light. Someone laughs softly. Someone complains about the heat. Someone wipes sweat from the neck with the back of a wrist. The room hums with labour, and the bubbling jars answer in small wet whispers. In the city, beer belongs not only to hunger and thirst, but to order. Workers receive rations, and beer can be part of what supports them through long days of building, carrying, digging canals, harvesting fields, or serving temple institutions. Imagine being paid partly in drinkable grain, which sounds charming until you remember your landlord may still prefer barley, silver, or both. Still, in a world where coinage does not yet rule everything, measured portions of grain and beer help bind labour to institutions. The city runs on water, clay, grain, and records, with beer moving quietly among them all. You pass a scribe sitting with a lump of clay on his lap. His reed stylus presses wedge-shaped marks into the soft surface. The little marks look simple from a distance, but they hold astonishing power. They can summon grain from storage, assign workers to a project, record offerings to a deity, and preserve a complaint that some poor official probably wished had been forgotten. You hear the tiny tick and drag of the stylus. You smell the wet clay, mineral and cool. The scribe does not look romantic. He looks busy, which is the honest expression of bureaucracy in every age. Beer appears in these records under terms that do not always translate neatly. Specialists still debate how many Mesopotamian beer names represent distinct recipes, strengths, colours, ingredients, or simply accounting labels used by institutions. It is a delicate problem. A tablet might tell us that a certain type of beer existed, but not whether it tasted smoky, sweet, thin, thick, cheerful, regrettable, or like something you would politely finish because your host is watching. The writing gives a structure, not full experience. History often works that way. It opens the door, then refuses to turn on all the lamps. You continue through a marketplace where pottery jars stand in clusters. Reed baskets lean beside walls. Fish glisten on mats. The smell is vivid. Almost too vivid river mud. Onions, wool, sweat, sesame oil, fresh bread, and beer. A tavern keeper ladles drink into cups. People sit low to the ground, shoulders relaxed, speaking in murmurs that rise and fall like water. The tavern is not simply a place to drink. It can be a social crossing point, a place of news, negotiation, flirtation, planning, and occasional foolishness. Because beer has always had a generous relationship with foolishness. Laws from ancient Mesopotamia show taverns were taken seriously, sometimes very seriously. Centuries within the broader Mesopotamian world produced legal traditions that mention tavern keepers, prices, measures, and suspicious gatherings. You can imagine officials worrying over dishonest measures or political chatter in dark corners. Even in the Bronze Age, someone is concerned that the local bar might become a meeting point for trouble. This is comforting in a strange way. Civilization grows complex, and immediately somebody has to regulate the drinks. You sit near a doorway where shade falls across your knees. A cup is placed in your hands. It is made of clay, not perfectly smooth. You feel tiny ridges left by shaping fingers. The beer itself is cloudy, perhaps tan or brown, with a soft thickness. It smells of grain, fermentation, and maybe dates. You sip. The flavour is rounded and nourishing, less crisp than modern lager, more like a living food. It coats the tongue gently. There is tang, sweetness, and something rustic that makes you think of storage rooms, sunlight on barley, and the patient labour of many people you will never know. A quirky treasure of this world is the hymn to Ninkasi, a Sumerian praise poem to the goddess of beer. It is also, in its own poetic way, a brewing recipe. The goddess is not some distant ornament. She is imagined through the actual process of making beer, preparing the mash, handling the vessels, letting the sweet liquid flow. It is wonderfully practical devotion. You praise the divine by describing the work. Modern recipe blogs take 2,000 words to tell you about a grandmother's kitchen before giving the measurements. The Sumerians gave the recipe to a goddess, which is honestly a stronger editorial choice. You follow the sound of singing toward a courtyard. The sun has lowered a little, and shadows from reed screens stripe the ground. Women prepare food. Someone pours beer for an offering. A priestly figure moves with formal calm. The atmosphere is hushed without being silent. There are footsteps, low voices, the scrape of pottery, and the faint rustle of garments. Beer enters ritual life because it is valuable, nourishing, and pleasing. To offer beer to the gods is to offer skilled human labour, fertile land, and transformation. Grain becomes drink, and drink becomes a bridge between human need and divine attention. Ninkasi's presence gives brewing a face and a name. But Mesopotamian religion is crowded with powers, and beer may be offered in many sacred settings. You stand near a temple storeroom and feel the coolness inside. Large jars rest in rows. Their rounded sides hold the dim light. Grain sacks are stacked close by. Everything smells stored, dusty, and faintly sweet. This is not just spiritual imagination, it is economic reality. Temples are major institutions. They organize land, labor, food, crafts, and offerings. Beer belongs to that machinery, glowing softly at the edge of ceremony and accounting. The city outside continues breathing. Children chase one another near a wall. A potter turns clay. A canal worker returns with mud up his legs. A woman balances a jar against her hip, walking with the beautiful, practical grace of someone who has carried weight since childhood. You pass a doorway and hear a family sharing an evening meal. Bread is torn, beer is poured. The sound is quiet, clay against clay, liquid into cups, someone sighing after a long day. You begin to understand why beer becomes so durable here. It fits the landscape. Barley tolerates conditions that can be hard on other crops. Irrigation brings life to the fields, but also salt to the soil over time. And barley's relative resilience makes it important in southern Mesopotamia. The drink born from barley carries the taste of adaptation. It is not luxury alone. It is a response to river, heat, soil, labour, and storage. Yet beer also carries hierarchy. Not everyone receives the same amount of quality. Rations can mark status. Offerings can display wealth. Institutions can control production. A cup may comfort the worker while also reminding him who measures the jar. This is the sleepy little secret of civilization. The same thing that gathers people can also organize them into ranks. Beer warms the body, but it can also appear in the cold columns of an account tablet. Evening thickens over the city. The river darkens. The mud brick walls hold the last heat of the sun, and when you lean your palm against them, they feel like a sleeping animal. From a courtyard comes the smell of baking bread. From a tavern comes a burst of laughter, quickly softened by distance. Above the rooftops, smoke climbs into violet air. A jar is opened, and the scent of fermented grain rises like a small household blessing. You sit with your cup and listen. The city is not quiet, but its sounds settle into Leia's river slap, donkey breath, reed mat flutter, human voices, a baby's cry, a brewer's ladle touching the side of a vessel. Somewhere, a scribe's tablet dries. Somewhere, a hymn is remembered. Somewhere, beer is being poured for a god, a worker, a friend, A traveller, a customer, a tired mother, a thirsty labourer with dust in his hair. In Sumer, beer has learned to live in records, rations, songs, and streets. It has entered the city without losing its earthy soul. It remains grain, water, yeast, time, and touch. But now it is also something more organised, more counted, more sacred, more social. You raise the cup slowly, feeling the clay against your lips, and the city seems to drink with you. You wake beside the Nile while the river is still silver with dawn. Mist hangs low over the water, soft as linen, and the banks smell of wet mud, cut reeds, fish, cattle, and warm bread just beginning to bake. The first sounds come gently, oars dipping, birds crying from the marshes, sandals brushing packed earth, a woman calling to someone inside a courtyard. The river moves with a calm confidence, as if it already knows that everyone depends on it and is trying not to be smug about the whole arrangement. You walk along the edge of a village where houses are made of mud brick, their walls pale in the early light. Roofs are flat, doorways are shaded, clay jars rest near walls, some stoppered, some open to the morning air. Grain dust floats in narrow shafts of sunlight. Your fingers trail across a plastered wall, and it feels cool, slightly rough, still holding the night. Somewhere nearby, dough is being shaped. Somewhere else, beer is being strained, poured, or simply watched with that ancient human expression that says, "Please ferment correctly, because everyone is counting on you." In Egypt, beer is not a side character wandering in late to add comic relief. It is part of daily life, part of labour, part of worship, part of family rhythm. A mainstream historical fact sits plainly in the dust and sunlight. Ancient Egyptians made beer from grain, and it was consumed by people across society, from workers to elites, often alongside bread as a central food. Bread and beer belong together here like two sleepy siblings. Both begin with grain. Both require water, heat, skill, and patience. Both feed the body. One you chew, one you drink, and both quietly remind you that civilization has a lot of carbs in its foundation. You step into a courtyard where the work has already begun. A woman kneels near a grinding stone, pushing grain forward with a heavy handstone. The sound is low and steady, a sandy rasp that seems to fill the morning. Another person tends a clay oven. Heat brushes your face as you pass. Dough rests in rounded shapes. Some loaves may be baked partly for eating, while grain mixtures are also prepared for brewing. The exact methods vary by period and place, and the surviving evidence gives glimpses rather than a single universal recipe. Egypt is long, old, and complicated. Naturally, it refuses to behave like a neat cooking show. You smell barley and emmer wheat, smoke, sour mash, warm stone, and the faint sweetness of dates. A vat sits nearby, its surface dull and cloudy. Someone stirs slowly with a wooden implement. The movement is unhurried, almost meditative. Beer in this world can be thick, nourishing, and fresh. It may be consumed soon after fermentation, not stored forever like a modern bottle drink. It may be sweetened or flavoured. It may be strained. It may be drunk from cups or jars. It may be ordinary enough for a worker's ration and sacred enough for a temple offering. You imagine the taste as you lift a cup. It is not crisp or sparkling in the modern sense. It has body. It tastes of grain, warmth, and fermentation, with a tang that settles at the back of the tongue. It is food-like, comforting, and alive. The cup is made of pottery, and its surface presses against your palm with tiny imperfections. A trace of damp clay cools your skin. You sip, and for a moment, the river, the fields, the oven, the granary, and the brewer's hand all seem present in the same mouthful. Egyptian workers are often associated with beer rations, And this is especially vivid when you picture the people who built tombs, temples, pyramids, and settlements for royal projects. The builders at Giza, for example, were not simply fed on fantasy and inspiring speeches from middle management. They received food and drink, and beer was part of the provisioning system that sustained heavy labour. In the dry heat, after hauling stone, shaping blocks, repairing tools, or carrying baskets. A ration of beer was not just pleasant, it was calories, liquid, morale, and a small mercy at the end of muscle-straining work. You walk toward a work camp where the air feels hotter, more open, bright enough to make you narrow your eyes. Men move in teams, ropes creak, tools strike stone with sharp, ringing taps, sand shifts underfoot. Sweat dries quickly on skin, leaving salt behind. The smell is human and mineral dust, sun-baked limestone, leather, onions, bread, beer, and the river breeze that never quite does enough but is appreciated anyway. Supervisor calls out. Someone answers. Someone else mutters a joke too low to be punished for it, the oldest safe form of workplace resistance. At midday, shade becomes treasure. You sit beneath a rough covering and feel the relief of cooler air on your shoulders. Food is passed around, bread is torn by hand, beer is poured into jars or cups. Conversation slows as people eat. There is the soft smack of dough, the swallow of drink, the clink of pottery, the sigh that follows thirst. The beer may be low in alcohol compared with stronger drinks, but it is steady, familiar, and sustaining. It belongs to the rhythm of labour as much as the hammer or basket. A quirky tidbit waits inside Egyptian medicine. Beer appears in some medical preparations, mixed with herbs, minerals, or other ingredients as a carrier for remedies. This does not mean every prescription was medically effective in the way a modern pharmacist would prefer, so please do not treat ancient beer therapy as a wellness plan. But it does show that Egyptians saw beer as useful, active, and acceptable in healing contexts. A remedy might include beer because it was available, drinkable, nourishing, and able to hold other substances. Also, it probably made certain treatments easier to tolerate. Ancient medicine could be imaginative, and sometimes the patient deserved emotional support. You pass into a more formal setting, where a temple rises from the settlement like a shape made of sun and order. The air changes. It is quieter, cooler in the shadow of walls. Incense curls faintly, resinous and sweet. Priests move in linen garments. Offerings are arranged: bread, beer, meat, fruit, flowers, and vessels of liquid placed with careful attention. In temple ritual, beer can be given to gods and to the dead, because the Egyptian afterlife is imagined not as empty floating, but as a continuation of needs, pleasures, and status. The dead require food, drink, and care. A tomb scene showing beer production is not just decoration. It is provision for eternity, which is an ambitious meal plan. You stand near painted walls where scenes of daily work are preserved in elegant order. Farmers cut grain, bakers shape bread, brewers handle vats, servants carry jars. The images are not random snapshots. They help maintain abundance beyond death. They show a world arranged, repeated, made reliable. The colours may have faded, but you can still feel the wish beneath them: let there be bread, let there be beer, let the household continue, let hunger never win. Scholars continue to debate how closely tomb and temple images reflect everyday brewing methods, rather than idealised or symbolic versions of production. The gestures are real enough to be recognisable, yet art in Egypt often follows conventions. It organises life into meaningful patterns. So you look carefully but gently. A painted brewer may show us a technique, a social role, a ritual idea, or all three at once. History is not being evasive to annoy you, though it does have that talent. It is simply layered. You move back toward the river as the afternoon begins to soften. Fields spread green and gold along the floodplain. The Nile's annual inundation gives Egypt its agricultural pulse, leaving fertile silt that supports crops. Canals guide water. Farmers time their work to the river's moods. Grain grows because the river comes, and beer exists because grain grows. The drink is liquid geography. It tastes, in some deep sense, like floodwater turned into food by sunlight and human labour. In a household courtyard, a mother gives instructions while a child watches the brewing process with wide eyes. The child is not learning from a written manual. Learning happens through repetition. You notice how much knowledge lifts in small details: the look of mash when it is ready, the smell when fermentation begins, the feel of grain between fingers, the sound of liquid poured at the right thickness. These are quiet arts. They leave fewer monuments than kings do, but they hold life together more reliably than royal bragging. As evening approaches, the village glows. Smoke rises from ovens. Cattle shift in their pens. The river reflects pink and gold light. You hear a flute somewhere, thin and sweet, almost hidden under voices. Beer moves through the settlement in jars carried against hips, set beside meals, poured for guests, measured for workers, offered in ritual, and remembered in tomb scenes. It is intimate and public at once. It belongs to the kitchen, the work site, the temple, and the grave. There is a gentle humour in how important it is. The drink is humble, cloudy, and perishable, yet it travels into sacred art and royal provisioning. A jar of beer may stand beside symbols of eternity. A worker may drink it with dusty hands. A priest may offer it to a god. A physician may mix it into a remedy. A family may share it at dusk with bread, onions, and tired conversation. Beer slips easily between worlds because it is useful in all of them. You sit at the riverbank as darkness gathers. The mud is cool beneath you now, reeds whisper. Frogs begin their night music. From nearby homes comes the smell of baking, sour grain, smoke, and human warmth. A jar is placed beside you, and the cup fills with a soft sound. You drink slowly. The taste is earthy, nourishing, touched by the field and the kiln, the flood and the hand. The Nile slides past in the dark, carrying moonlight in broken pieces. The village settles, pottery cools, children grow quiet. Somewhere, beer is still fermenting in a vessel, its surface alive with tiny changes no eye can fully follow. In Egypt, beer is not merely refreshment. It is bread's flowing companion, the worker's ration, the god's offering, the dead person's comfort, the healer's ingredient, and the household's familiar friend. It is ordinary enough to be overlooked and essential enough to be painted for eternity. You arrive in the Mediterranean by sunlight, with blue water flashing between white walls, olive trees twisting on dry hillsides, and vines climbing wherever the earth is kind enough to allow them. The air smells of salt, dust, crushed herbs, sun-warmed stone, and wine must fermenting somewhere behind a courtyard wall. Cicadas tremble in the heat, sandals scrape over paving, a market awning snaps softly in the breeze. Everything seems bright, argumentative, and slightly impressed with itself, which is a fair description of much of the ancient Greek and Roman world. You walk through a Greek town where men gather in shaded spaces to talk politics, poetry, trade, philosophy, and all the other serious subjects that become easier when someone else has done the farming. Cups are carried carefully, jugs are watered down, wine is mixed in bowls, because drinking it neat is often treated as reckless, foreign, or simply a sign that someone is about to ruin the evening. Wine is not just a beverage here. It is a social language. It has manners, rituals, gods, jokes, and rules. It knows how to recline at dinner and quote poetry. Beer, by contrast, is usually left standing awkwardly near the door. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath the clinking cups in classical Greece and Rome. Wine dominated elite drinking culture, while beer was often associated with Egyptians, Thracians, Celts, Germans, and other peoples beyond or at the edges of Mediterranean identity. This does not mean nobody in Greek or Roman lands ever drank beer. People did, especially in regions where grain was more available than grapes, or where local traditions favoured brewing. But among many writers of the wine-loving Mediterranean, beer became a convenient symbol of the outsider. It was the drink of colder lands, rougher clothes, strange languages, and people who had not yet received the memo about tasteful diluted wine. You pass a symposium, a drinking party where couches line a room and lamps glow softly against painted walls. The floor is cool beneath your feet. Perfumed oil hangs in the air, mingled with roasted meat, garlands, wool, and wine. A flute girl plays. Conversation rises and falls. Someone makes a clever remark and clearly waits for everyone to notice. A large mixing bowl stands at the centre, holding wine blended with water. The host controls the strength of the drink, which is very civilized, unless you're the guest hoping for a stronger pour. This world does not simply drink wine, it thinks with wine. Greek myth gives Dionysus the power to loosen the mind, dissolve the social boundaries, bring joy, madness, fertility, and danger. Wine can be noble or chaotic, sacred or comic. It appears in poetry, theatre, medicine, hospitality, and sacrifice. Beer has no equal place in this elite Greek imagination. It appears more often as something distant, curious, or faintly ridiculous. Not always hated, exactly. More like sniffed at, the ancient version of saying, "Oh, that is interesting," while quietly moving your cup farther away. Yet you keep walking, because history is rarely as tidy as elite taste wants it to be. Beyond the polished rooms and bright marble sanctuaries, the Mediterranean world touches many brewing cultures. Traders arrive with goods from inland regions. Mercenaries bring habits from home. Soldiers stationed far from vineyards drink what the local land provides. Migrants do not politely abandon their tastes at the border, in ports, camps, taverns, and frontier settlements. Beer keeps moving in clay jars, wooden vessels, leather containers, and memory. You imagine a Greek traveller in Anatolia, Armenia, or Thrace, encountering fermented barley drink in a cool storeroom. The vessel is large, perhaps set into the ground. The smell is grainy and sour, with a rustic sweetness. The drink may be taken through reeds or straws to avoid floating bits on the surface. A quirky ancient tidbit tells of Greek descriptions of people drinking barley wine from large vessels with straws, a detail that sounds oddly charming, and also like the world's earliest group beverage with suspicious sediment management. You lean in and sip. The reed is smooth against your lips. The liquid is thick, tangy, and surprisingly satisfying after road dust. The Greek word often connected with beer is zethos, especially for Egyptian beer, though terms vary across regions and texts. The language itself shows distance. Naming the drink does not always mean embracing it. It can mark it as foreign, the way people sometimes pronounce unfamiliar foods with dramatic caution, as if the syllables might bite. Still, words preserve contact. Greeks knew of beer. They wrote about it. They encountered it in travel, trade, war, and stories. Their mockery proves not ignorance but awareness. Now the road carries you toward Rome, where the city spreads like an appetite. You hear wheels grinding over stone, hammers striking metal, vendors calling from stalls, water rushing through channels, and the restless murmur of a place that believes the world has been arranged for its convenience. The air smells of bread ovens, olive oil, sweat, leather, incense, livestock, fish sauce, and dust baked by the sun. Wine shops and taverns open into crowded streets. amphorae stand stacked and sealed. Graffiti marks walls with boasts, insults, names, and advertisements. The Romans are very organised, except when they are absolutely not. Roman wine culture is enormous. Wine travels through trade networks, fills cellars, accompanies meals, marks status, appears in religion, and receives endless attention from agricultural writers. Vineyards spread across Italy, Gaul, Spain, and North Africa. The Romans classify, store, ship, tax, praise, and occasionally overpraise wine. They have opinions about vintages, regions, aging, and mixing. In other words, they are already doing what modern people do, only with more sandals and fewer tasting notes about wet granite. Beer, known in Latin through terms such as cerevisia in some contexts, belongs more strongly to the provinces and frontier zones. In Gaul, Iberia, Britain, and Germanic regions, fermented grain drinks remain familiar and important. Roman soldiers stationed in the north may drink local beer because vineyards do not always follow the legions with sufficient enthusiasm. Forts need supplies, roads bring traders, camps become towns. Local women and men brew for households, markets, and military customers. The Roman frontier is not just a line of shields, it is a place where foods, languages, gods, coins, tools, and drinks rub against one another. You stand near a Roman military camp in a damp northern landscape. The atmosphere changes. The sky sits lower. The wind smells of wet grass, smoke, wool cloaks, horse sweat, and muddy leather. The ground gives slightly under your steps. A cook fire hisses as rain taps the embers. Soldiers move between timber buildings and tents, their armour dulled by weather. Far from the warm vineyards imagined by poets, a cup of local beer makes practical sense. It is made from grain that grows nearby. It can be brewed close to where people live. It belongs to the climate. You lift a cup offered by a trader whose accent tells a story Rome has not fully conquered. The beer is cool, rough, perhaps smoky from malt dried near fire. It smells of barley, damp wood, and yeast. It does not ask to be compared with a delicate Falernian wine. It simply exists, sturdy and unembarrassed. You drink, and the taste suits the place earthy, filling, a little wild around the edges. A Roman officer may roll his eyes. A tired soldier may ask for another. Historians continue to ask whether Greek and Roman contempt for beer represents actual widespread dislike, or mainly the snobbery of literate elites who prefer to define themselves against their neighbours. The question matters because most surviving voices from antiquity belong to educated men with reasons to exaggerate difference. A Roman author mocking Germanic beer may tell us more about Roman identity than about the drink itself. The tavern drinker, the camp follower, the local brewer, and the provincial farmer are harder to hear. Their cups were real, but their opinions rarely survived in polished prose. You wander through a provincial settlement where Roman habits and local customs share the same street. There is a bathhouse nearby, warm with steam and mineral damp. There is a shrine where imported and native gods stand awkwardly but peacefully together. There are workshops, granaries, and taverns. A woman tends a brewing vessel behind a low building. A man carries a wine amphora past her doorway. Neither drink disappears. The empire does not replace every local habit with a Roman one. It absorbs, taxes, judges, imitates, ignores, and sometimes secretly enjoys. Beer also finds its way into medical and agricultural discussions, though it never receives the same adoring literary glow as wine. Some writers treat it as nourishing, some treat it as inferior, some describe its making with curiosity. The plant world matters here: barley, wheat, millet, and other grains can be fermented in different regions. The result is not one single beer, but a family of drinks shaped by local crops, vessels, temperatures, and customs. The Mediterranean elite may say beer as if it were one rustic thing, but on the ground it is many things. You sit in a roadside inn as dusk settles. The room smells of smoke, stew, wet wool, old straw, and spilled drink soaked into wood. A lamp flickers in a niche. The bench beneath you is hard and polished by many travellers. Outside, hooves splash in mud. Inside, a merchant counts coins. A soldier warms his hands around a cup. Two locals speak in a language Rome has learned to tax more easily than understand. Wine is poured at one table, beer at another. Nobody in this room is writing an elegant treatise on cultural superiority. They are tired, thirsty, and hungry, which has a way of simplifying philosophy. The drink in your cup is cloudy, with a foam that fades quickly. It leaves a grain taste behind. You feel warmth spread through your chest, not dramatic warmth, not the thunderbolt of myth, just the small human easing that comes when travel pauses and the body receives something familiar. Beer's role in Greece and Rome is not to sit on the throne of culture. Wine already occupies that seat, draped in ivy and quoting verse. Beer survives by being useful, local, adaptable, and stubborn. Night gathers around the inn. The lamp flame trembles. Someone laughs at a joke you do not catch. The rain softens to mist. You hear the low murmur of many lives meeting briefly under one roof. Trader, soldier, brewer, traveller, servant, farmer, stranger. Across the Mediterranean world, wine may claim refinement, but beer keeps its quiet territory in frontier towns. Northern fields, Egyptian households, Thracian gatherings, Celtic feasts, and military camps where the weather laughs at imported elegance. You rest your hand around the cup, feeling its warmth fade into your palm. The empire may sneer, but the grain does not mind. It grows where it can. It ferments when given water and time. It becomes comfort without needing approval from philosophers or senators. And in the soft noise of the tavern, beneath the smell of smoke and damp wool, beer remains what it has always been in the hands of ordinary people, practical, social, nourishing, and gently resistant to anyone who thinks taste can be conquered. You step into medieval Europe under a low grey sky, where the morning is damp, the road is rutted, and the air smells of wet straw, wood smoke, horse hide, and cold earth. A village crouches around a church tower, its roofs dark with rain, its lanes shining with mud. Chickens pick at the ground with the confidence of tiny landlords. A bell rings from somewhere beyond the mist, slow and bronze, calling people into the day with a sound that seems to settle inside your ribs. The world feels smaller here, not because people lack imagination, but because most lives are tied closely to field, hearth, parish, manor, and season. Forests press near the edges of cleared land. Wolves are not only storybook decoration. Roads can be unsafe, bridges unreliable, winters hungry. Yet inside this roughness, brewing grows more skillful, more regular, and more deeply connected to institutions that know how to write things down. Beer is still household work in many places, still village work, still local and changeable. But another force now becomes important, the monastery. You approach one through a gate of stone and timber. The walls are cool beneath your fingertips, damp in the seams where moss has found a comfortable little retirement plan. Inside, the sounds change. The road noise fades. You hear footsteps on flagstones, the rustle of wool habits, water moving through a channel, a distant chant rising calm, measured tones. The atmosphere is ordered, quiet, and practical. Prayer lives here, yes. But so do kitchens, barns, gardens, workshops, storerooms, guest houses, infirmaries, accounts, and a surprising number of people thinking very seriously about ale. A mainstream historical fact rests warmly in this courtyard medieval monasteries in Europe often brewed beer or ale for their own communities, for guests, for the poor, and sometimes for sale. Monks did not invent beer, despite what a few brewery tours may imply with heroic lighting and a suspiciously confident guide, but monasteries helped preserve, refine, and document brewing practices. They had land for grain, organised labour, written records, cellars, kitchens, and the habit of repeating tasks carefully. A monastery is, among other things, a place where routine becomes sacred by being done well. You follow a brother toward the brewhouse, the door opens, and warm air rolls over you like a blanket. The room smells of malt, steam, smoke, damp wood, yeast, and herbs. It is a deep, comforting smell, somewhere between bread, rain, and a kitchen that has been working since before sunrise. Copper or iron vessels may hang or stand near the hearth, though the exact equipment depends on time and place. Wooden tubs sit dark with moisture. Barrels rest along a wall. The floor is slick in patches, gritty in others. You hear the soft slap of liquid, the creak of staves, the hiss of a fire, and the low murmur of men who know that silence is holy, but beer will not stir itself. The brewing process is still laborious. Grain must be malted, meaning it is soaked and allowed to germinate, then dried before it can be mashed. The malt is crushed and mixed with hot water to draw out sweetness. The liquid is separated, boiled or heated with flavouring plants, cooled and fermented. Every stage requires judgment. Too much heat can spoil the work. Dirty vessels can invite sourness. Bad storage can ruin a batch. A brewer's hand learns what a text cannot fully teach: the feel of wet malt, the scent of a mash that is ready, the look of foam when yeast has woken. You lean near a vat and feel steam touch your face. It beads on your skin. The air is heavy and soft. A monk lifts a paddle, and droplets fall back with quiet plunks. He may be brewing a weak drink for daily use, a stronger ale for special occasions, or a carefully managed batch for guests. Beer in medieval Europe is not a single thing. It is a broad family of grain drinks, sometimes called ale when unhopped. Later, more often, beer when hops are involved. Though language shifts unevenly by region, medieval people are not trying to satisfy our tidy categories. Very inconsiderate of them, but they were busy surviving. Now you come to one of the great changes in beer history: hops. Small green cones from the hop plant bring bitterness, aroma, and preservative power. They do not conquer every kettle at once. Brewing in much of early medieval Europe often uses mixtures of herbs known as grute, which can include plants such as bog myrtle, yarrow, rosemary, heather, or other local botanicals. These mixtures flavour the ale and may carry economic control, since rights over grute production and sale can be profitable. Hops gradually spread across many brewing regions, especially in parts of northern Europe, because they help balance sweetness and improve keeping quality. In a world without modern refrigeration, that is not a small gift. You walk into the herb garden where the wet leaves brush your sleeves. The air smells green, sharp, and medicinal. Rain gathers on plant tips and cools your fingers when you touch them. A brother tends rows of useful plants, not ornamental little darlings chosen to impress visiting influencers, but practical companions, herbs for cooking, healing, dyeing, and brewing. Hops climb when given support, twisting upward in a patient spiral. Their cones are papery, resinous, and faintly spicy when crushed. You hold one in your palm, and it feels delicate, almost too light to change the fate of a drink. Yet it does. A quirky tidbit belongs to the fasting table. In some monastic settings, beer was treated as acceptable nourishment during fasts, helping monks endure periods when solid food was restricted. The phrase liquid bread gets attached to this idea, and while it can be overused, It captures something real about strong beer's calories and grainy body. You can imagine a monk accepting his cup with solemn discipline, and perhaps, just perhaps, the tiniest private flicker of gratitude. Medieval spirituality could be rigorous, but it was not required to be flavourless. Even holiness appreciates a decent malt profile. You step into the refectory, the dining hall, where long tables stand in rows. The room is cool compared with the brewhouse. Light enters through small windows and lies pale on wood. A reader's voice may carry from a raised place, speaking scripture or moral instruction while the community eats in silence. Bowls are set down, bread is broken, cups are filled. The sound is restrained pottery placed on boards, cloth shifting, liquid poured, a cough quickly swallowed into quiet. Beer here is not party noise, it is sustenance folded into discipline. Still, monastic brewing is not only inward-looking. Travellers arrive at monastery guest houses, tired from roads that punish feet, and weather that has never learned hospitality. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasises receiving guests with care. And across medieval Europe, monasteries become important places of lodging, charity and relief. A cup of ale offered to a guest is warmth, safety and welcome. You sit in a guest hall with damp cloak steaming near a fire, hands wrapped around a wooden cup. The wood feels worn smooth by many palms. The drink smells smoky and grain-rich. Outside, rain taps the roof. Inside, your shoulders slowly unclench. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers were the main drivers of technical improvement in medieval beer, or whether urban commercial brewers and household producers deserve far more credit than popular legend gives them. The uncertainty is fair. Monasteries produced records, and records make historians notice them. But many skilled brewers left fewer documents because they worked in kitchens, village yards, rented brew houses, or crowded towns. The written past is not always the most important past. It is sometimes just the loudest survivor in the archive. You leave the quiet cloister and enter a growing town, where brewing is louder, messier, and increasingly commercial. The street smells of dung, smoke, wool, onions, river water, and warm malt from a nearby brew house. Hammers strike, vendors shout, a cartwheel groans. The medieval town is not a postcard. It is cramped, alive, suspiciously damp, and full of regulations. Brewing becomes a trade in many places, and authorities worry about price, quality, measures, ingredients, and taxation. Nobody wants bad ale, short measure, or spoiled drink sold at full price, although human nature has certainly attempted all three. In some regions, signs announce where fresh ale is ready. A branch, bush, or pole might be displayed to show drink for sale. A practical signal in a world where literacy is not universal, and branding departments have mercifully not yet been born. You see people notice the sign and drift toward the house. The doorway releases warmth and yeast scent into the street. Inside, voices overlap. A brewer watches the cups carefully. Fresh ale does not keep forever, so timing matters. Sell too late, and the flavour turns. Sell too dear, and the neighbours remember. The arrival of hopped beer also changes trade. Hopped beer keeps better over distance, making larger scale production and transport more practical. Towns with access to grain, fuel, clean enough water, skilled labour, and markets can build reputations. Northern European brewing regions, including areas of the Low Countries and German lands, become especially important in the spread of hopped beer. Over time, the word beer itself becomes increasingly associated in English with hopped drink, while ale remains linked to unhopped or differently brewed traditions. Though the terminology is wonderfully slippery, language, like yeast, does not always behave on command. You pause in a town brewhouse and place your hand near the fire. Heat pulses against your skin. Your eyes sting faintly from smoke. The brewer moves quickly, sleeves rolled, face flushed, hair damp at the temples, a child carries kindling, an apprentice hauls water, barrels need cleaning, vessels need scalding, grain needs watching, customers need serving, and every mistake costs money. Medieval brewing may sound cosy in retrospect, but the work is heavy, hot, wet, and exacting. Romance is easier when you're not the one lifting the tub. Night settles over the town and monastery alike. Bells mark the hour. Smoke lies low under the darkening roofs. In the brewhouse, the fire sinks into coals, and the vats breathe softly as fermentation begins its hidden labour. Yeast works without applause. Hops release bitterness into memory. Malt gives it sweetness. Hands clean. Carry, pour, record, and repeat. You stand in the doorway, feeling cool night air meet the warm smell of brewing behind you. Beer in this age has become more organised without becoming less human. It feeds monks in silence, comforts guests in rain, supports town economies, invites regulation, absorbs herbs from gardens, takes bitterness from hops, and leaves traces in account books, rules, complaints, and blessings. It is still grain transformed by water and time, but now it carries the sound of bells, the patience of cloisters, the noise of markets, and the smoky touch of medieval labour. You lift a cup as the last light fades. The drink is darker than straw, cloudy perhaps, with a firm grain taste and a herbal edge. It is not modern, not polished, not standardised. It is alive with place. You sip slowly, and the warmth moves through you while bells dissolve into mist. Around you, the medieval world breathes in prayer, trade, hunger, craft, and rain. Somewhere in the dark, a fermenting vat murmurs to itself, as if the whole age is sleeping beside it. You walk into a village market while the morning is still soft and grey, and the whole place seems to be waking through its nose. The air smells of wet wool, trampled grass, smoke, onions, horse sweat, fresh cheese, and ale yeast drifting from a nearby doorway. Carts stand crooked in the lane. Chickens complain underfoot. A pig noses at a basket as if conducting an official inspection. Somewhere, a church bell rings, and somewhere else, someone is already arguing about the price of eggs with the passion of a courtroom drama. The ground is damp beneath your shoes, packed hard by many feet but slick where straw has been thrown down over mud. You feel the cold of the morning through the soles. Your hand brushes a rough wooden post, splintery and damp, and above it hangs a sign that tells passers-by ale is ready for sale. In many places, brewing is not yet a grand industrial business. It lives inside homes, courtyards, kitchens, and small rented spaces. It belongs to local rhythm. Grain is brewed. Ale is sold while fresh. Neighbours come. News spreads. And everyone pretends they're only stopping for one cup. Very noble. Very believable. A mainstream historical fact sits right at the heart of this scene in medieval England and many parts of Europe. Brewing ale was often household work, and women played a major role as brewers and sellers. These women are often called alewives in English records, though the reality is broader than one tidy label. Some brew casually to use surplus grain, some sell regularly, some run alehouses, some support families with the income, some work with husbands, daughters, servants, or neighbours. Brewing is labour, trade, domestic skill, public service, and occasionally a reason for local officials to appear with judgmental expressions. You step through a low doorway into a house where ale is being prepared. The room is warm and smoky. Rushes cover the floor, releasing a faint grassy scent when trodden. A fire snaps in the hearth. Steam fogs the air, softening the edges of wooden beams. The brewer stands near a tub, sleeves pushed back, forearms shining with heat and moisture. Her hands are red from work. She stirs with a long paddle, and the liquid answers with thick, slow sounds. A child carries a small bundle of kindling. An older woman checks a vessel by smell, leaning close with the authority of someone no yeast would dare disrespect. This is not delicate work. It is hauling water, lifting grain, heating mash, scouring tubs, judging temperatures without a thermometer, and selling quickly before the drink spoils. Water must be carried in heavy buckets that bite into the fingers. Malt must be handled, crushed, steeped. Vessels must be cleaned with care. Smoke gets in your hair and sleeves. Steam dampens your face. The floor grows slippery. The brewer must mind the batch while answering customers, watching children, feeding animals, and keeping an eye on anyone who looks likely to leave without paying. The fantasy of rustic brewing often forgets the backache. History does that when it wants pretty lighting. A cup is offered to you. It is wooden, worn smooth around the rim, and slightly sticky where old ale is dried in a seam. The drink is cloudy, pale brown, and smells of warm grain with a faint sourness. It is fresh, not built for long storage. You sip, and it tastes soft, bready, and a little sharp at the edges. It fills the mouth gently. The warmth of the room settles into your chest. Outside, the market noise blurs into a woven hum. Hooves, wheels, vendors, laughter, a baby crying, a dog barking at nothing in particular, which remains one of history's strongest continuities. Selling ale brings women into public economic life in ways that records cannot ignore. Court rolls mention brewers fined for poor quality, short measures, or breaking local rules. Officials enforce the assize of ale, a system meant to regulate price, measure, and sometimes quality in relation to grain costs. It sounds dry, but it matters. Ale is everyday nourishment and refreshment. If a seller cheats the measure, people notice. If ale is weak, sour, or overpriced, people complain. The law steps in not because ale is trivial, but because it is common, necessary, and profitable enough to cause trouble. You follow a local ale taster or ale conner down the lane. He has the solemn air of a man whose public duty involves drinking from other people's batches and somehow calling it sacrifice. In English towns, ale conners or similar officers inspected ale and helped enforce standards. A quirky tidbit clings to them like spilled drink, later tradition claims some testers wore leather breeches and sat in spilled ale to see if it became sticky, which would suggest added sugar or poor brewing. Whether that practice was common is doubtful, but it is such a wonderfully ridiculous image that it survives anyway. You can picture the officer rising from a bench with great dignity, checking his trousers, and declaring justice served. Bureaucracy rarely gets more glamorous. The market thickens as the day rises. Customers crowd near brewing houses and ale stalls. A farm worker with mud up his legs drinks quickly, wiping foam from his lip. A widow bargains for a smaller measure. A shepherd leans in to hear news from another parish. A young man tries to look impressive and fails gently. Two women exchange information about a marriage arrangement, a debt, a sick cow, and someone's scandalous behaviour at a feast. Alehouses become engines of speech. They are places where news travels faster than carts, where reputations are polished or dented, where labourers find warmth, and where officials worry that too much talking may become disorder. You sit on a bench in an alehouse as afternoon light slants through a small window. The bench is hard beneath you, rubbed smooth by many bodies. The table is scarred with knife marks and dark rings from cups. The smell is dense smoke, spilled ale, damp cloak, stew, sweat, rushes, and the faint sour note that seeps into wood over years. A ladle knocks against a pot. Someone laughs with a wheeze. A traveller shakes rain from his hood and steps inside, bringing with him the scent of road mud and cold air. This is where inns begin to matter in a broader way. Along roads, at crossroads, near markets, outside town gates, and close to pilgrimage routes. Inns and taverns offer drink, food, lodging, stabling, and information. The ale house serves locals. The inn serves movement. You feel the difference as pack animals stamp in a yard outside. Harness bells jingling softly. A hostler rubs down a horse. A merchant checks a bundle of cloth. A pilgrim warms cracked hands around a cup. The firelight throws shadows across beams darkened by smoke. Inns are not merely cosy stops for weary travellers, although they can certainly be that. They are nodes in a network. They connect villages to towns, buyers to sellers, strangers to local rumour. Deals are made over cups. Debts are acknowledged or denied. Servants are hired. News of war, harvest, prices, births, deaths, and royal orders arrives in fragments, slightly improved by each teller, because people have always understood that fact sometimes need a little theatrical support. The innkeeper listens, remembers, and pours. Beer and ale also mark social rank. Not all drinks are equal. Stronger, cleaner, better-made ale may cost more. Weak small beer or thin ale may suit ordinary thirst and daily use. Better tables receive better cups, better seating, perhaps better attention from the host. Yet the same room may hold a broad mixture of people, separated by purse, reputation, gender, occupation, and local expectation. A cup can invite conversation, but it does not erase hierarchy. It softens edges, which is not the same as removing them. Historians still argue whether the rise of larger commercial breweries pushed women out, mainly because brewing required more capital, equipment, and guild access, or whether changing moral attitudes toward women selling drink also played a major role. Both forces likely matter, and they do not move at the same speed everywhere. As towns grow and hopped, beer travels farther. Brewing can demand bigger kettles, more storage, more credit, more transport, and stronger ties to official trade structures. Men increasingly dominate many commercial brewing sectors, but women do not simply vanish. They keep brewing in households, serving in taverns, running inns, inheriting businesses, and appearing in court records with the stubborn clarity of real people. There is also a shadowy argument around imagery. Some modern writers have suggested that the hat, broom, cauldron, and cat associated with witches may echo symbols linked to alewives, who used tall hats or signs, stirred cauldrons, swept spaces, and kept cats for mice. It is a tempting idea, rich and dramatic, perhaps a little too tidy. Many scholars treat the connection cautiously, because evidence is uneven and witch imagery developed through many channels. Still, the association reveals something true about suspicion. Women who worked publicly, handled money, served men drink, and occupied noisy social spaces could become targets of satire, regulation, and moral anxiety. Society enjoys women's labour, then gets nervous when women profit from it. Very consistent, not very charming. Evening comes slowly. The market thins, mud cools. Smoke settles in blue layers under the eaves. In the alehouse, cups are rinsed, barrels checked, benches pushed back. A few drinkers remain. Voices lower now, no longer sharp with trade but softened by fatigue. The brewer counts coins by firelight. Her fingers move carefully, touching each small piece of metal as if reading the day through it. Outside, a horse snorts in the yard. Rain begins again, fine and steady or a pattering on thatch. You raise the cup one last time and notice how much life gathers in it. Household work, women's income, local law, travel, gossip, warmth, suspicion, hospitality, and survival all meet in this cloudy drink. It is not grand in the royal sense. It does not need to be. It belongs to doorways, market mornings, wet roads, tired hands, benches, barns, and low rooms where people come in from the weather and become, briefly, less alone. The fire sinks lower. The room grows amber and soft. Your palm rests around the wooden cup, feeling the last warmth fade. Somewhere in the dark yard, water drips from a roof into a barrel with a slow, hollow note. The alehouse quiets, but not completely. It keeps a murmur, like yeast in a covered tub, still working beneath the surface of ordinary life. You come to the harbour at first light, when the sea is not yet blue but pewter, folded and breathing beneath a pale sky. The docks creak under your feet. Tar sticks faintly to the boards. Ropes lie coiled like sleeping snakes, rough with salt and damp against your fingers. The air smells of fish, pitch, wet wood, smoke, bilge water, oranges in a crate, and beer sealed inside barrels waiting to be carried into the wide, uncertain world. Ships crowd the waterfront with their masts rising into the mist. Sailors shout across the quay. Gulls scream as if personally offended by commerce. A cooper taps iron hoops tighter around a wooden cask, each strike ringing cleanly in the morning air. Barrels stand everywhere. Barrels of salted meat, barrels of flour, barrels of gunpowder, barrels of beer. The empire of the sea does not look like a crown from here. It looks like storage, paperwork, rope burns, and men arguing about who forgot to load the spare sail. Beer is now a traveller. It is provision, cargo, ration, comfort, trade, good, taxable commodity, and a taste of home carried into places where home becomes blurry. A mainstream historical fact rises from the docks. European expansion carried beer and brewing traditions across oceans, especially through colonial ports, military settlements, and trading companies. Beer went aboard ships not because sailors were sentimental, although many certainly were, but because crews needed drink, calories, and morale on voyages that could last weeks or months. Water stored in casks could grow foul. Beer did not remain perfect forever, but it could be more palatable for a time, and stronger beers kept better than weak ones. You step aboard a wooden ship and the deck shifts beneath you with a slow animal motion. The planks are slick from mist. Your hand closes around a rail polished by weather and palms. Below, the hold is dark and close. Lantern light wavers over barrels stacked with care. The smell down here is powerful damp oak, stale air, salt, pitch, old rope, sour beer, onions, and something indefinably ship-like that suggests both adventure and poor ventilation. You hear water slap the hull. Somewhere above, blocks creak as sails are raised. The ship groans like it has opinions about the journey. A sailor rolls a cask into place. It bumps over the boards with a hollow thud. Beer aboard ship can be rationed carefully. In some navies and merchant vessels, daily drink is part of keeping men functional, calmer, and less likely to discover exciting new forms of mutiny. The drink may be small beer, lower in alcohol and meant for regular consumption, or stronger ale for better keeping. But sea travel is unkind. Heat, motion, bad casks, and time can turn a pleasant drink into something sour, flat, or deeply suspicious. You imagine a sailor lifting a cup, sniffing it, and silently rethinking all his life choices. Out beyond the harbour, the coast sinks away. The wind fills the sails with a heavy snap. Salt spray touches your face, cool and fine. Your lips taste briny. Days lengthen into the rhythm of the sea-watch bells. Rope work, cramped sleep, hard biscuit, salted food, sloshing barrels, and the constant sound of wood complaining against water. Beer becomes part of this rhythm. A cup passed on deck at sunset carries more than alcohol. It carries warmth in a cold wind, memory in a strange latitude, and the faint civilized promise that not everything must taste like salted despair. A quirky tidbit rides in one famous style India Pale Ale is often surrounded by legend, especially the tidy story that it was invented solely to survive the voyage from Britain to India. The real history is messier, which is always more fun and less marketable. Strong, well-hopped pale ales did travel well, and beer shipped to British communities in India helped create demand and reputation. But brewers were not all standing around one morning saying, "Let us invent a beer for empire and future hipsters." It developed through trade, taste, brewing practice, and the practical advantages of alcohol, hops, and careful production. You land in a colonial port where the heat arrives like a hand pressed gently but firmly over the mouth. The air smells different now: spices, sweat, wet vegetation, smoke, molasses, palm fibre, unfamiliar flowers, and the sour sweet edge of fermenting goods. Warehouses line the waterfront, clerks write in ledgers, soldiers lean in patches of shade, dock workers carry crates and barrels, their shoulders shining. Bells ring from a church, while voices in many languages cross over one another in the street. Beer enters this place as both comfort and intrusion. You walk past a tavern built near the docks. Inside, the room is dim and crowded, the shutters are half closed against the glare. Cups clatter, flies circle lazily, the floor sticks underfoot. A European trader drinks imported beer and complains that it is not as good as at home, which is impressive, given that he brought his expectations thousands of miles and still failed to pack humility. Nearby, local drinks are being served too: palm wine, rice beer, millet beer, maize beer, pulque, chicha, sorghum beer, and other fermented beverages shaped by their own deep histories. Colonial beer does not enter an empty world. It enters places already rich with fermentation. This matters. The story of beer in empire is not only Europeans carrying barrels outward, it is also encounters between brewing traditions, sometimes curious, sometimes violent, often unequal. In Africa, Asia, and the Americas, communities had long made alcoholic drinks from local grains, fruits, saps, and roots. Colonial officials, missionaries, traders, soldiers, enslavers, settlers, and local rulers all reacted to these drinks in different ways. Some taxed them, some condemned them, some consumed them, some tried to replace them, some learned from them quietly while pretending not to. Fermentation, like conversation, rarely respects borders completely. You pass a plantation where the sweetness in the air has a darker weight. Molasses fumes rise from boiling houses. Heat trembles above open pans. Workers move under watchful eyes, their bodies bent by labour and coercion. Barrels here may hold rum, sugar, provisions, and sometimes beer for overseers, sailors, soldiers, or labourers, depending on place and system. Commerce is not gentle in this world. Beer travels long routes also used by slavery, extraction, forced labour, and military power. A cask can look innocent until you ask who carried it, who paid for it, who was denied it, and whose land grew the grain. The wooden barrel becomes a symbol of this age. You touch one in a warehouse, feeling the curve of oak staves under your palm, the ridges of metal hoops, the dampness gathered near the base. It smells of wood, beer, salt, and cellar shadow. A cooper's craft is essential, because beer cannot travel well without reliable containers. Barrels are technology disguised as humble furniture. They must hold liquid under motion, pressure, heat, and handling. Too loose, and the cargo leaks away. Too poorly made, and spoilage creeps in. The empire may write treaties and raise flags, but it also depends on someone who knows how to make a watertight curve. Scholars still argue whether beer was mainly a tool of European identity in colonial settings, preserving habits from home, or whether it became more important as a flexible commercial product shaped by local tastes, climates, and ingredients. Both views reveal something true. A British officer in India, a Dutch settler at the Cape, a German migrant in Pennsylvania, a Portuguese trader on the coast. All may drink beer as a thread back to familiar life. Yet colonial brewing also adapts. Local grains are used when barley is scarce. Recipes shift. Climate challenges storage. Indigenous and African knowledge enters practice, sometimes acknowledged, often not. You find yourself in a North American settlement where the air is crisp with autumn, leaves scratch out along a dirt lane. Smoke lifts from chimneys. A small brew house stands near a stream, its door open to release warm malt air. Settlers brew with barley when they can, but also experiment with maize, molasses, pumpkins, spruce tips, and whatever else the land and desperation provide. Spruce beer becomes especially useful in some maritime and military contexts, partly because spruce can add flavour and, in certain preparations, help provide vitamin C. It is not exactly the fashionable tasting room experience of carefully arranged flights, unless the tasting notes include tree, survival, and mild confusion. Inside the brewhouse, steam softens the window. You hear the boil rumble. The smell is resinous and green when spruce is used, mingling with malt and smoke. Your fingertips grow sticky from sap. The drink tastes unusual, sharp at the edges, forested, slightly medicinal but not unpleasant. It belongs to a frontier life where brewing is improvisation. People make do with unfamiliar seasons, different soil, uncertain supply lines, and a powerful longing for ordinary comforts. In trading posts, beer can mark power. Imported beer may be reserved for officials, officers, merchants, or settlers with money. Local labourers, enslaved people, sailors, and soldiers may receive rations of weaker drink or none at all. Alcohol can also become entangled in unequal trade, diplomacy, and exploitation, especially where colonial powers manipulate desire, dependency, or ritual exchange. Not every shared cup is friendly. Some are strategic, some are dangerous. Some carry hidden costs heavier than the barrel itself. You sit at a fortified trading post as evening approaches. The walls throw long shadows. Outside, unfamiliar birds call from trees. Inside, a clerk scratches figures into a ledger, recording barrels, skins, tools, cloth, grain, and debts. The sound of the pen is tiny but relentless. Men talk in low voices near a table. A cup of beer sweats in the heat. The atmosphere is tense under its ordinary surface. Trade, military presence, diplomacy, suspicion, boredom, hunger, and ambition all sit in the room together, pretending to be polite. Beer is no longer just a village drink or monastic product. It has become part of global systems. It crosses the Atlantic, rounds capes, supplies armies, follows migrants, appears in colonial capitals, and changes under pressure from climate and empire. Breweries emerge in colonial cities. Some serve garrisons and settlers, some use enslaved or coerced labour. Some eventually become local institutions, reshaped by the people who live there rather than by the distant countries that first claimed them. Night falls over the harbour again. The sea darkens to ink. Lanterns bob along the quay, their light trembling in puddles and on wet planks. Barrels are rolled from warehouse to ship with deep wooden thunder. You stand beside them and feel the vibration in your bones. The smell of tar, beer, salt, and spices gathers around you. Somewhere, a sailor sings softly. Somewhere, a merchant calculates profit. Somewhere, a labourer lifts more weight than any song will remember. You raise a cup in the lantern glow. The beer tastes travelled, touched by oak, motion, heat, storage, and distance. It carries comfort, yes, but also conquest, longing, trade, adaptation, and harm. It is not innocent, and it is not only guilty, it is human, which is usually messier. In the barrel, civilization has found a way to send grain across water, wrapped in wood, guarded by ledgers, opened in strange ports, and poured into cups that mean very different things depending on whose hand holds them. The tide pulls gently against the pilings. Ropes creak. The ship breathes. The barrel waits. You enter the age of steam through a city morning that trembles under iron. The streets are wet with soot-dark rain, and the air tastes faintly metallic when you breathe in. Chimneys rise above brick rooftops, pouring smoke into a low sky. Wheels clatter over stone. Hooves strike sparks. Factory whistles call workers from narrow rooms into narrower schedules. Somewhere, under all that noise, a brewery is waking, and it does not sound like a village hearth anymore. It sounds like pumps, chains, pulleys, barrels, carts, boiling vessels, and men shouting over machinery because apparently progress has always needed to be extremely loud. You walk toward a tall brick brewhouse with arched windows clouded by steam. The door opens, and warmth rolls out around you, carrying the deep smell of malt, coal smoke, wet wood, hot metal, yeast, and bitter hops. The floor is slick beneath your boots. Your fingers touch an iron railing, cold at first, then faintly warm where the building's heat has seeped into it. Above you, pipes cross the ceiling like dark veins. Copper kettles glow in the dimness, polished by labour and firelight. The whole place feels alive, not in the old hidden way of a clay jar bubbling in the corner, but like an enormous animal with belts, valves, breath and appetite. Beer is becoming industrial. A mainstream historical fact belongs here during the 18th and 19th centuries. Brewing was transformed by scientific instruments, steam power, improved malting, better transport, yeast research, and eventually mechanical refrigeration. These changes made it possible to brew more consistently, at larger scale, and across wider markets. Beer no longer has to remain so tightly bound to one kitchen, one courtyard, one season, one local habit. It begins to move through cities by cart and rail, through ledgers and contracts, through public houses and export routes, with a new confidence that smells of hot copper and accounting ink. You stand near a mash tun while malted grain meets heated water. The scent rises thick and sweet, almost like bread crust dissolved into steam. A worker checks the mash with practiced movements, but now he is not relying only on instinct. Thermometers and hydrometers change the brewer's world. A thermometer gives heat a number. A hydrometer helps measure sugar and strength. These tools do not remove skill, but they give skill sharper eyes. The brewer can track what once had to be guessed through touch, smell, and long experience. The old senses remain, but now they work beside glass tubes, scales, gauges, and notebooks. There is something oddly intimate about measurement. You lean close to watch a brewer read a floating instrument in a sample jar. The liquid clings to the glass. Tiny bubbles rise. He notes a figure, wipes his hand on his apron, and moves on. That small number may shape wages, taxes, quality, profit, and flavour. It is not romantic in the candlelit sense, but it is its own kind of magic invisible sweetness, becoming visible through a line on a scale. Humanity sees a mystery and immediately asks whether it can be quantified. Very on brand. In London, porter becomes one of the great urban beers of the industrial age, dark, strong, and suited to mass production. It thrives among workers and city drinkers. Large breweries build enormous vats, some holding astonishing quantities. You walk inside one such storage space and feel the air cool around you. The wooden vats loom like round houses, dark with age and dampness. They smell of oak, roasted malt, and sour cellar air. A footstep echoes. A drip falls somewhere in the gloom. These vats are monuments, not to kings or saints, but to thirst organised on a metropolitan scale. A quirky tidbit waits in those giant vats, and it is both impressive and slightly alarming. In 1814, a massive vat at a London brewery burst, releasing a flood of porter into nearby streets. The event became infamous because beer, which is normally friendlier in cups, is considerably less charming when it arrives as a wave through walls and alleys. It is a reminder that industrial scale brings industrial risk. Bigger vessels mean bigger profit, bigger supply, and occasionally bigger disasters. The 19th century is very proud of its engineering, right up until the engineering develops a sense of humour. You leave the dark beer city and travel into regions where cold begins to shape taste. In Bavaria and Central Europe, lager brewing depends on cooler fermentation and storage. The word lager is connected with storage, and the method involves yeast working at lower temperatures, followed by long maturation in cool spaces. You enter a cellar cut into earth and stone. The air changes instantly. It is cold enough to raise the hairs on your arms. Moisture beads on the walls. Your breath softens in front of you. Barrels rest in quiet rows, and the atmosphere is patient, almost sleepy. Here, beer is not rushed. It settles, clears, smooths, and deepens in the dark. Before mechanical refrigeration, brewers use winter ice, caves, deep cellars, and shade to control temperature. A charming detail grows from this practical need in parts of Bavaria. Brewers planted chestnut trees above lager cellars because their broad leaves helped shade the ground, and their roots did not drive too deep into the cellars below. People then gathered under those trees to drink, helping create the beer garden tradition. It is beautifully sensible. First you solve a storage problem, then you accidentally invent one of humanity's better outdoor seating arrangements. Not bad for a tree minding its own business. You sit beneath chestnut leaves on a warm afternoon. Gravel shifts under your shoes. The bench is smooth and sun-warmed beneath your hand. A mug is set before you, cool and heavy, with foam clinging to the rim. The beer is cleaner and brighter than many older ales. With a rounded malt body and a crispness born of cold maturation, around you, voices rise gently, leaves rustle overhead. There is the smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, damp cellar air, horse traffic from the road, and the green bitterness of hops. The mood is public but relaxed, like a city taking one long breath. Then comes the Pale Revolution. In 1842, in the Bohemian city of Plzeň, brewers created a pale lager that helped give the world Pilsner, a style that would become enormously influential. Its brightness depended on pale malt, soft water, hops, and careful lager fermentation. Just as important, glassware and improving glass production allowed drinkers to admire clarity and colour. A dark mug hides many sins. A clear glass is rude enough to show everything. Suddenly, beer can be golden, brilliant, sparkling in light, and people begin to expect that beauty from the drink itself. You hold a glass near a window and watch the liquid catch the sun. It glows straw gold, with bubbles rising in fine streams. The foam gathers white and neat at the top. The smell is gentle bread, flowers, grass, a little spice from hops. You sip, and the taste is clean. Bitter enough to refresh, soft enough to invite another. It is not thick food in a cup. It is elegant, brisk, and dangerously easy to like. The modern thirst for pale lager begins to make sense in your hand. Science deepens the change. Louis Pasteur's work on fermentation helps show that microorganisms are responsible for fermentation and spoilage. Brewers begin to understand yeast not as vague living froth, but as a specific actor in the process, later, at the Carlsberg laboratory in Denmark. Emil Christian Hansen develops pure yeast culture methods, allowing brewers to cultivate selected yeast strains with far greater consistency. The brewery becomes a place where craft and laboratory meet. White coats enter a world of aprons. Microscopes join kettles. Yeast, the invisible worker, is finally asked for identification papers. You step into a brewing laboratory. The smell is cleaner here, sharper with alcohol, glass, and disinfected surfaces, Light reflects off instruments. A scientist adjusts a lens. Under the microscope, yeast cells appear as tiny rounded forms, quiet and unglamorous, doing more for civilization than many emperors. The room is hushed except for small clicks, pen scratches, and the distant rumble of the brew house. There is wonder in this quiet. The old mystery has not vanished. It has simply become smaller, visible, and somehow more astonishing. Experts still debate how much the rise of modern beer was driven by scientific discovery compared with refrigeration, railroads, taxation, urban demand, advertising, and changing consumer taste. It is tempting to crown one hero the scientist, the engineer, the brewer, the drinker, the railway, the cold machine. But beer changes because all these forces tug together. Refrigeration lets lager travel beyond natural cold seasons. Railways widen markets. Taxes reward certain strengths or methods. Urban crowds demand reliable supply. Science improves consistency. Taste shifts when people see pale beer shining in glass. History rarely moves because one person pulls a lever. It usually moves because everyone is tugging on different ropes and pretending they planned it. Mechanical refrigeration is one of those ropes. When brewers can make cold rather than wait for winter or beg caves for cooperation, lager production expands dramatically. You enter a refrigerated storage room, and the cold wraps around your wrists and neck. Machines throb nearby, steady and deep. Pipes sweat. Barrels and tanks rest under controlled chill. Outside, summer heat may shimmer over the city, but inside, winter has been domesticated. The brewer no longer depends entirely on season. That is a quiet revolution, the kind that changes taste by changing temperature. Industrial brewing also changes labour. Smaller breweries may struggle against large firms with capital, machinery, and distribution networks. Workers specialise: cooperage, malting, engineering, bookkeeping, laboratory work, delivery, and sales all become part of the brewing economy. The brewer is no longer only a person stirring a tub. Brewing becomes a system. It can produce astonishing consistency and vast quantity, but it can also flatten local difference. Efficiency is useful. It is also a little bossy. Evening falls over the industrial city. The brewery windows glow amber through the smoke. Carts roll out with barrels. Somewhere a train whistle stretches into the damp air, carrying beer toward towns that may never smell the mash that made it. You stand near the loading yard as iron wheels rattle and horses steam in the chill. The air is full of cold smoke, wet leather, malt sweetness, and the sharp green ghost of hops. You lift a glass one last time, and the beer is clear enough to catch the lamplight. It carries machinery, chemistry, cold cellars, rail lines, careful yeast, and human thirst in one shining body. It is no longer only local, no longer entirely seasonal, no longer mysterious in the same old way. Yet when you sip, the comfort is familiar grain, water, bitterness, warmth moving quietly through the chest. The machines roar, the gauges tremble, the yeast works unseen, and the age of modern beer settles into the foam. You step into the 20th century through the sharp smell of wet pavement, coal smoke, cigarette ash, and rain striking the brim of a dark felt hat. The street glistens under electric lamps. Motorcars cough at the curb. Somewhere, a streetcar bell rings with a bright metallic warning, and shoes hurry along the sidewalk as if everyone has suddenly remembered an appointment with destiny, or at least with paperwork. Storefront windows glow. Newsboys shout headlines. The air feels quick, nervous, modern. Beer has entered a strange age. It has survived farms, temples, monasteries, ships, factories, and scientific laboratories, only to find itself staring at a new enemy with a pamphlet, a moral campaign, and a very determined expression. In the United States, the temperance movement grows from many roots: religious revival, concern about domestic violence, workplace discipline, poverty, immigration fears, women's activism, political organising, and genuine alarm about heavy drinking. Alcohol becomes a symbol of disorder to reformers who believe society can be made cleaner, safer, more efficient, and more virtuous if the tap is turned off. You walk past a saloon in an American city around 1910. Its windows are fogged. The door opens, and warmth spills out with the smell of beer, tobacco, sawdust, sweat, pickled eggs, damp wool, and brass polish. Inside, men lean along a long wooden bar. Glasses clink. A piano stumbles through a tune in the corner. The floor is scattered with sawdust to soak up spills. A practical touch that makes the room feel both cosy and faintly like a stable trying to improve itself. Bartenders move quickly, sleeves white, mustaches serious, eyes trained for trouble. The saloon is not just a place to drink. It is a clubhouse, hiring hall, political office, news exchange, immigrant refuge, and sometimes a trap. Free lunches lure customers to buy more beer. Local politicians make deals in back rooms. Workers find companionship after long shifts. Some families see wages vanish there. Reformers point to the saloon as a centre of corruption and suffering. Brewers, meanwhile, see a customer base and a culture. Both views catch part of the truth, which is annoying for anyone who prefers history to behave like a courtroom drama with one obvious villain. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly here. The United States enacted national prohibition in 1920 through the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act, banning the manufacture, sale, and transport of intoxicating liquors until repeal in 1933 with the 21st Amendment. Beer did not disappear, because humans are not famous for responding to bans by quietly forgetting desire. Instead, brewing went underground, sideways, legalish, medical, industrial, domestic, and very creative. A thirsty country became a country of loopholes. You enter a brewery forced to change its life. The great kettles stand polished but uncertain. The smell of malt still lingers in the brick walls, warm and sweet, as if the building itself remembers better days. Workers pack equipment, clean tanks, label new products. Some breweries turn to near beer, a very low alcohol beverage that tastes enough like beer to remind people what they are missing. Others make malt syrup, soft drinks, ice cream, yeast, cereal beverages, or anything that might keep the lights on and the creditors polite. Some close forever, some wait, some wink. The texture of this time is strange under your fingertips. You touch a bottle of near beer, cool and smooth, its label cheerful in a slightly desperate way. You smell the drink, and it offers a ghost of malt, thin and restrained. It is beer with its shadow removed. Somewhere, someone is trying to enjoy it with dignity. Somewhere else, someone is laughing into a hidden glass of stronger stuff behind a locked door. A quirky tidbit bubbles up from the legal fog during Prohibition. Stores could sell malt extract, grape concentrate, and equipment with warnings that practically explained what not to do if one wished to avoid making alcohol. The instructions might say not to add yeast, not to let it sit in a warm place, and absolutely not to wait a certain number of days. Humanity, being a deeply literal species when convenient, read these warnings with care. It was moral education by reverse recipe. One imagines a customer nodding gravely while thinking. Thank you, officer. Extremely clear. You slip into a speakeasy hidden behind an ordinary door. A peephole slides open. A face studies you. Then the room lets you in with heat, music, perfume, cigarette smoke, spilled beer, gin, damp coats, and the electric thrill of being somewhere forbidden. Jazz shivers through the air. Glasses tap on small tables. A woman laughs with her head tilted back. Men in suits lean close to speak over the band. The floor trembles faintly beneath dancing feet. The atmosphere is bright and shadowed at once, like a secret wearing sequins. Beer in the speakeasy may not always be good. Some is brewed hastily, stretched, diluted, spoiled, or unsafe. Homebrew varies wildly. Bootleg supply chains reward speed and secrecy more than quality control. But people drink anyway, because the forbidden has flavour beyond flavour. You lift a glass. It is cold at the rim, sticky near the base. The beer smells yeasty, rough, a little sour. You sip carefully. It tastes like rebellion and poor sanitation having a conversation. Not ideal, perhaps, but memorable. Law enforcement raids some places. Others operate with bribes or protection. Organised crime profits from illegal alcohol, though the popular image of prohibition as nothing but gangsters in sharp suits can flatten a much wider story. Families brew in kitchens. Farmers sell ingredients. Doctors prescribe medicinal alcohol. Religious exemptions continue. Wealthy drinkers maintain cellars. Ordinary people navigate a maze of law, habit, hypocrisy, and appetite. Prohibition creates criminals, but it also creates comedians of daily survival. Researchers still disagree about whether prohibition should be judged mainly as a failure because it encouraged illegal markets and disrespect for the law, or as a partial public health success because alcohol consumption and some alcohol-related harms did decline for a time. The answer depends on which evidence you weigh, which community you examine, and what you think law is supposed to accomplish. History does not hand you a clean verdict in a little envelope. It gives you a crowded bar, a court docket, a hospital ledger, a family memory, and a political slogan, then asks you to sleep well with all of that. When a repeal comes in 1933, the mood changes with a sound like barrels rolling back into daylight. You stand on a city street where crowds gather, breath fogging in cold air, hats tilted, faces bright, brewery gates open, trucks are loaded, and kegs move again legally. The smell of fresh beer returns to loading docks and taverns with something like relief. Yet the beer world that emerges is not the same as the one that entered the ban. Many small breweries have died, larger companies with capital, distribution networks, and modern equipment are better positioned to dominate. You feel the new century accelerate. Refrigerated rail cars, highways, bottling lines, cans, pasteurization, advertising agencies, radio, television, and supermarkets reshape beer into a national product. The local tavern remains, but the national brand rises. Beer becomes lighter, clearer, colder, more consistent, and easier to ship. Pale lager expands across the American market and then across much of the world. It is crisp, mild, dependable, and designed not to frighten anyone. In a way, it is the beverage equivalent of a clean white shirt, safe, efficient, and perhaps not eager to discuss its feelings. You enter a mid-century brewery, and the scale feels almost cinematic. Conveyor belts rattle. Bottles flash past in shining rows. Caps snap into place with a fast metallic rhythm. The air smells of grain, steam, cleaning solution, cardboard, and cold beer. Your fingers rest against a chilled metal rail, smooth and humming with vibration. Workers wear uniforms. Inspectors watch the line. Machines rinse, fill, seal, label, and pack with relentless precision. The sound is no longer the breath of a vat or the creak of a cask. It is a mechanical river made of glass. Advertising gives beer a new public personality. Posters show smiling people at beaches, barbecues, bowling alleys, ballparks, fishing trips, and tidy suburban patios. Radio jingles stick in the mind like burrs. Television turns the beer commercial into a small national ritual. The drink is no longer just something you buy. It becomes a mood you're invited to purchase: friendship, masculinity, relaxation, reward, belonging, victory, and the simple promise that your life might improve if only your cooler were better stocked. Subtle, not always. Effective, very often. Sports and beer become especially close companions. Stadiums smell of hot dogs, peanuts, concrete dust, spilled lager, and summer heat trapped under plastic seats. You hear the crack of a bat, the roar of a crowd, the vendor's call rising over the aisle. A cold cup sweats in your hand, damp against your palm. Foam clings to your upper lip. The beer is pale, fizzy, and refreshing, designed for heat, noise, and repetition. It does not ask you to contemplate monastic discipline or yeast morphology. It asks you to watch the game and maybe buy another during the 7th inning, because civilization marches on. Global brewing companies grow through mergers, acquisitions, licensing, and distribution power. Famous brands travel far beyond their home countries. In many places, beer begins to taste increasingly similar, shaped by mass-market preference for light lager. This sameness has its virtues. A traveller can find a familiar bottle almost anywhere. Quality becomes predictable. Spoilage declines. Prices can fall. Yet something local is often thinned in the process. The small accents of place, grain, water, yeast, and custom grow quieter beneath the bright hum of the brand. You sit at a bar in the late 20th century, surrounded by neon signs glowing red, blue, and gold. Refrigerators buzz behind the counter. A television mutters above the bottles. The bar top is smooth, cool, and faintly sticky beneath your fingertips. There is the smell of fried food, sanitizer, old wood, perfume, cigarette smoke in the walls, and beer foam drying in glassware. The bartender pulls a draft. Pale liquid streams into a pint, clear and cold, topped with a white cap of foam. You drink, and it is simple, clean, familiar. This beer world is powerful, efficient, and oddly soothing in its predictability. It has passed through law, ban, repeal, machinery, marketing, and global expansion. It has been moral panic, secret pleasure, industrial product, national symbol, and stadium companion. It has lost some variety and gained enormous reach. It has become lighter in body but heavier in cultural presence. Outside, night gathers over the city. A delivery truck rumbles away from the curb. Neon trembles in rainwater on the street. Inside, glasses clink, a game plays. Someone laughs too loudly, and the cold tap keeps flowing. Beer has become modern enough to wear a logo, sponsor a team, survive a ban, fill a supermarket aisle, and still remain. At its simplest, grain turned social in the hand. You step into a small brewery on a rainy evening, and the first thing you notice is how quietly alive the room feels. Not quiet in the sense of silence, because pumps hum, glasses clink, boots squeak on the damp floor, and someone at a nearby table is explaining fermentation with the confidence of a person who has had exactly one tasting flight. But beneath the voices, there is a gentler rhythm water moving through pipes, yeast working unseen, malt resting in sacks, steam fading against high windows. The air smells of toasted grain, citrusy hops, wet coats, floor cleaner, coffee from the bar, and a faint sourness drifting from barrels stacked in a shadowed corner. Your hand closes around a glass that is cool and smooth, misting lightly against your fingers. Outside, headlights slide across the rain-dark street. Inside, amber light gathers on wood, steel, faces, and foam. This is the age of craft, revival, experiment, and memory. Beer has become modern enough to be global, yet intimate enough to return to neighbourhoods, farms, garages, old warehouses, and tiny tap rooms where the brewer might also be the person sweeping the floor. Very glamorous, naturally. Nothing says romance like scrubbing a drain after midnight. A mainstream historical fact shapes this room from the late 20th century into the 21st. Many countries saw a major rise in small independent breweries and renewed interest in traditional, regional and experimental beer styles in the United States, Britain, parts of Europe, Australia, Japan, Latin America, South Africa, and many other places. Drinkers began looking beyond mass-produced pale lager toward fuller flavours, bitter ales, roasted stouts, hazy pale beers, saisons, wheat beers, barrel-aged strong ales, wild fermented sours, and styles once nearly forgotten by mainstream shelves. You walk past sacks of malt stacked along the wall. They smell warm and dusty, like bread crust and harvest fields. You touch the coarse woven surface and feel little grains shift beneath your palm. The brewer opens one sack and scoops out pale malt, then another with darker roasted grain. Each has its own colour, scent, and promise. Pale malt gives sweetness and body. Roasted malt gives coffee, chocolate, toast, smoke, or bitterness. Wheat softens the foam. Rye can add spice. Oats lend silkiness. Corn, rice, millet, sorghum, buckwheat, cassava, quinoa, and local grains can all enter the modern brewer's imagination. Sometimes from necessity, sometimes from heritage. Sometimes because someone in rubber boots said, well, this might be weird, which is how many cultural advances begin. The mash tun waits, round and shining. Hot water meets crushed grain, and the scent rises rich and comforting. Almost like a bakery hidden inside a machine. Steam brushes your cheek. The metal rail beside you is warm to the touch. A brewer stirs carefully, watching temperature, texture, and time. Modern craft brewing may look rebellious from the outside, all chalkboard menus and mischievous names, but the work itself is measured and disciplined. The batch must be cleaned into existence. Sanitation is not poetic, but it is heroic. Yeast is delicate. Bacteria are opportunists. A dirty valve can defeat a grand vision faster than any critic. You move toward the fermentation tanks, tall stainless cylinders standing in a neat row. They reflect the room in curved fragments. In one tank, a pale ale ferments with bright aromatic hops. In another, a dark stout thickens with roasted depth. A third holds a lager sleeping cold and clean. The air near the tanks is cooler, faintly damp. You hear a soft bubbling from a blow-off tube, tiny pulses of carbon dioxide escaping as yeast eats sugar and makes alcohol. Flavour, aroma, and foam. The sound is humble, like a pot simmering in another room. Yet this is the old miracle, dressed in modern steel. Craft beer often celebrates hops, and some modern varieties smell wildly different from the bitter herbs of older brewing. You lift a handful of hop pellets, green and powdery, and crush them gently between your fingers. This scent leaps out grapefruit, pine, mango, herbs, flowers, onion, peach, resin. Sometimes even something that smells suspiciously like a fruit basket arguing with a forest. Hops can preserve, bitter, perfume, sharpen, and dominate in certain modern beers, especially India pale ales. Hops become the star performer, possibly the lead singer, possibly the person who refuses to leave the stage. A quirky tidbit bubbles from the revival of sour and wild beers. Some brewers today deliberately invite microbes that earlier industrial brewers worked hard to exclude, using organisms such as Brettanomyces, Lactobacillus, and Pediococcus to create funky, tart, earthy, or fruity flavours. In a clean lager brewery, such microbes might be treated like tiny vandals. In a sour beer cellar, they are honoured guests with complicated personalities. You stand beside wooden barrels, and the smell is sharp. Vinous, musty, lemony, and old. The wood feels cool beneath your fingertips. Inside, beer slowly changes through time, oxygen, oak, and microscopic life. It is less like manufacturing and more like negotiating with a committee you cannot see. You taste from a small glass. The sour beer is bright and tart with notes of cherry skin, hay, oak, and cellar air. It wakes the tongue without shouting. Not everyone loves it. Some people sip and look betrayed, which is fair. Sour beer does not always arrive politely. But it reconnects brewing with older realities, when fermentation was rarely pure, vessels breathed, and local microbes shaped flavour whether invited or not. Modern brewers can now choose wildness with intention, which is a very human compromise control the chaos just enough to sell it in a beautiful bottle. Scholars and brewers continue to debate what authentic beer history really means when ancient and regional recipes are recreated today. Is authenticity found in the ingredients' method, taste, social context, vessel, yeast, or the feeling a drink gives? A beer made from an ancient recipe in a modern lab may be chemically interesting, but it is not consumed in the same world. The grain is different, the air is different, the drinker is different. Even your expectations have been trained by refrigeration, glassware, menus, and that one friend again. Now whispering about barnyard notes. Authenticity is not a single doorway. It is a courtyard with many entrances. You find another kind of memory in local brewing. A brewer in Mexico may draw from corn, piloncillo, cacao, or indigenous fermentation traditions. A brewer in Japan may use rice, yuzu, sansho, or sake yeast. In parts of Africa, sorghum and millet beers continue to carry community meaning beyond the imported language of modern craft. In Scandinavia, farmhouse brewing traditions preserve unusual yeasts such as kveik, which can ferment warm and fast while producing distinctive aromas. In Belgium, lambic and saison traditions remind drinkers that place, microbe, season, and patience can be as important as branding. Each glass becomes a small map, not of borders, but of climate, crop, memory, and taste. You sit at a long table in the tap room. The wood is smooth but nicked, sticky near one edge where someone spilled a stout and made a quiet escape. A flight of small glasses rests in front of you, each one a different colour, pale gold, hazy orange, ruby brown, black as coffee, pink from fruit, amber like autumn light. The bartender describes them with calm enthusiasm. One was brewed with local honey, one uses smoked malt, one spent months in oak, one includes sea salt and coriander, one is based on a 19th century porter, one is simply called lawn chair, which may be the most honest name in the room. Around you, people talk softly. Some are experts, some are curious, some are only waiting for fries. Beer still performs its oldest social task. It gives people a reason to sit together. The clothes have changed. The lighting has improved. The floors are easier to mop, mostly. But the pattern remains deeply familiar grain transformed into gathering, labour softened by conversation, a cup moving from hand to hand. The craft movement also carries tension. Small breweries can revive local economies and styles, but they can struggle with rent, debt, distribution, competition, and changing taste. Large corporations buy successful craft brands. Trends rise quickly and vanish like foam. A brewery may build a devoted community, then discover that community now wants hard seltzer, non-alcoholic beer, or a hazy IPA that tastes like tropical breakfast fog. The market is creative, restless, and not always kind. Still, the best small breweries keep making places where flavour and belonging meet. You lift a final glass, perhaps a simple pale ale, perhaps a dark mild, perhaps a non-alcoholic beer brewed with real care, because modern beer culture is also making room for people who want flavour without alcohol. The glass is cool. Foam clings to the side in soft rings. You breathe in malt, hops, and the faint wet smell of rain at the door. You drink slowly, and the taste feels less like an ending than a return to something ordinary and profound. Beer is not civilization by itself. It is not a king, a temple, a law code, a machine, or an empire. It is smaller and more persistent. It is what people make when they have grain, water, time, hunger, skill, curiosity, and other people nearby. It can nourish, comfort, exploit, celebrate, exclude, include, soothe, and surprise. It can be sacred in one hand and casual in another. It can fill a clay cup, a wooden mug, a silver chalice, a green bottle, a stadium plastic cup, or a tulip glass glowing under taproom lights. Now the room grows softer. The rain outside becomes a steady hush. The tanks stand quiet in the dimness, holding their patient transformations. Your glass rests warm now where your fingers have held it. Voices lower, chairs scrape gently. The smell of malt lingers like bread at the edge of sleep. You let the last sip slowly over your tongue. Grain, water, bitterness, time. And then you set the glass down. The lights blur a little. Foam slides down the inside of the glass in pale, delicate lines. Somewhere in the building, yeast continues its tiny work, unseen and unhurried, making change without spectacle. Outside, the street shines with rain, and every reflection trembles, then settles. You breathe in, you breathe out. The story of beer becomes less a timeline than a warm room, a shared table, a quiet vessel, and the gentle knowledge that people have always found ways to gather, to make, to remember, and finally, to rest.